look what he used to do. And it's like, yeah, but I'm not on that no more. So what's your end goal?
What about your lyrics?
What about them?
What are you saying in your lyrics?
Nothing. It to piss old white people off like you. I like talking about the most random shit.
Why is that appealing to you? Would you like to be able to do the same?
Yeah. I've heard a lot worse lyrics, to be honest.
Do you think it's tongue-in-cheek, or do they mean it, or?
My friend Earl said this in the song, but I was too white for the black kids, and I was too black for the white kids. So I kind of didn't really fit much into a certain spot. Greatness to me is finally getting my video on MTV. It's on there now, and I'm happy. I finally got my shit on fucking MTV. Some people might think that's selling out or whatever, but I don't really give a fuck. That's fucking great to me. I'm proud of myself. I've been wanting that since I was 7 years old, and I finally got that shit. And hard work pays the fuck off.
Okay, so Tyler, the Creator, owes us an apology, right? At least that's what you would believe if you witnessed the quick and very public social media fallout or discourse last month. But before all that, hi, hello, how are you? I am Square Symbols. This is Mashed Potato. I'm a working musician who loves to examine the intersections of politics, music culture, and sociology. And there's so much here that it took me a little while to gather all my thoughts for this one. And to be honest, it's been a long time coming anyway. So let's get a little background and go over some ground rules first. First things first, for the most part, this is an intra-community conversation that will examine anti-blackness, homophobia, and queerness through a queer black lens. So if you're not a black queer person, I would proceed with caution, grace, and respect in my comment section. I'm not above deleting comments, this is not a democracy, and everything doesn't really need your opinion. So tread lightly. Second, there will be discussions of SA and violence, not in a gratuitous way, but in reference to Tyler's earlier work. It sadly plays a role in the conversation. So if that's too much for you, I would suggest sitting this one out. Third, I try to approach, let's say, complicated conversations like this with a broad contextual perspective. So this isn't going to be a flat hit piece on a guy you dislike or a full-on glaze session. I think that's everything. So
police have busted a rapper performing at a South by Southwest venue for inciting a crowd into a mob. Here's video from APD. Their arrest warrant for Tyler Okunma, known as also Tyler the Creator, says he was performing Thursday at the Scoot Inn on East 4th. Detectives for Code Ordnance say the venue was at its 999-person capacity when the rapper yelled for folks to bust through the gates. Tyler now faces a misdemeanor riot charge. He was held on $3,500 bond.
On October 14th, 2025, the world learned about the passing of singer-songwriter and neo-soul icon D'Angelo, a New Yorker, multi-instrumentalist, and architect of 90s soul and R&B. This hit hard for music nerds and black folks specifically because he defined the soul sound space in the 90s going into the new millennium, and charted a pathway for the collaborative networks that would continue to inspire generations and crystallize the genre going forward. Tyler the Creator, being a musician and a person who grew up in the 90s, went to Twitter to share his personal connection and admiration for D'Angelo's legacy, which was met with a collection of tasteless remarks from Twitter users. Now, a lot of people are going to say that this is his audience, that he's intentionally cultivated over the years, but I would just put my nuance hat on and say that it was Twitter, or Elon Musk's house, X. What I will say about the app is that it's changed drastically over the years to cater to a far-right fan base that's generally hostile to anybody who's not white or a woman. The site itself seems to prioritize dickheads, and that's just my observation. Do what you will with that. I can't fully say that the comments had carried over or had the same flavor on IG or wherever else Tyler posted, and though there are still some smaller black circles on the site, in regards to the bigger accounts, full of grade A right-wing weirdos. Again, do what you will with that information. But moving on. Following the collection of unseasoned commentary on Tyler's grief post, I think he liked a tweet that called out the white people who were reacting negatively. Folks took that opportunity to call attention to Tyler's old tweets that were indeed full of anti-black sentiment. Were these tweets from a decade plus ago? More than likely, yes. But they were brought into the forefront to bring into focus the audience Tyler cultivated earlier in his career, which, don't worry, we'll get to. But from there, TikTok, Reels, and kinda YouTube seem to recycle the same discourse we've been having about Tyler ever since he became a critical darling with 2017's Flower Boy. And I think that's enough foundation. Let me know how I did below, and if you're still here, subscribe if you fuck with the video. I put a lot of love into these. Also, I write, research, and edit these myself, so join my Patreon if you really want to support the channel. If you can't do that, liking and sharing goes a long way. All right, so in order to have an informed conversation about this, we have to look at the art and actions of a young Tyler creator. So let's start there. Born Tyler Gregory Okamna at the start of the 90s, Tyler spent his early years in Hawthorne, California, a predominantly Hispanic and black suburb, before moving to the more well-off Ladera Heights around the same time his professional career started to take off. Why is this important? It's not really. Well, not that important. But as I saw recent discourse around Tyler trickle in, I heard folks firmly state that he came from money, especially when he grew up. And from what I've been able to surmise from looking into this while rectifying what I've heard him say about growing up himself, it seems like the early years were kind of a struggle. His father reportedly leaving when he was little, and his mom raising him alone for the majority of their childhood. Him attending a staggering 12 different schools, and according to him, also struggling financially.
Stakes, mama made you a promise, it's no more Section 8. Made and claim that I don't know about minimum wage or Section 8, water in the ketchup bottle.
Otherwise, he had a pretty standard upbringing, working a shitty coffee job in his mid to late teens for a few years to help fund his creative endeavors, and in order to get his work out there, he sent this email.
I know you're like, what the fuck is this? I'm 17 and just released an album for my mixtape. I compose my music and rap. The tape includes other young folks my age that rap and produce. I produce most of it. If you like Stereolab, The Neptunes, Eminem, or just new shit, you should really check it out. I'm not on any I'm trying to be different, 808 heartbreak crap, any my swag is so flash shit. Just some crazy piano chords over funky lyrics. So please give it a shot. I'm Tyler, by the way. If you're trying to hear some of my music, check out. And for the tape, download ifuture.com. And sorry for the weak site. I made it and shit low budget. Haha. Thank you.
The art in question, though, at the awkward age of 17, Tyler wrote and self-produced his first full-length album, Bastard, released online for free in 2009 as a foray into the alternative hip-hop landscape. The album, while showcasing Tyler's affinity for interesting jazz chords and MF Doom style production,
Hello, the hype is so mellow, bitch, I'm dope and my pipe is so yellow.
it's hard to listen to because of its content.
Got all the black bitches mad cause my main bitch vanilla. She trying to get her groove back like Stella.
Well, how its devices and themes are framed. Before we talk about that, we gotta go over the aesthetics of shock culture in music history.
Watch out! I ain't lying!
As discussed in my heavy rock video that you should definitely watch, the origins of shock or gimmick rock can be traced back to the occult stylings of a screaming Jay Hawkins, who used the appearance of a stereotypical voodoo priest to sell the mythical nature of his 50s hit, I Put a Spell on You. This gimmick, as advised by Cleveland DJ Alan Freed, helped Hawkins garner attention during this televised performance of the song. And to other acts at the time, signaled that being abrasive and shocking can help sell records and embellish the brand or image of one's musical project.
Minds and plot destruction.
While bands like The Who loosely rebelled against hipster culture by weaving that into their album narratives while exploring the advent of the concept record, or groups like Led Zeppelin alluded to mysticism through subtle imagery while they mostly postured as a loud blues band, the obsession with religious imagery stands at the core of Black Sabbath's identity, especially examining the social context of the use of said imagery. Outside of their heavier guitar work being the product of a factory finger injury from the band's guitarist Tony Iommi, and deviant tritones informing the darker tone and more ominous blues and jazz compositions, the band itself, with its themes, embraced imagery ripped out of pulpy horror films at the time, as well as indulged in a very Catholic fear of Satan while tapping into an obsession with the occult. And as the band's image crystallized, they began poking fun at Catholicism and Christianity specifically. American shock rock act Alex Cooper doubled down on this and brought it to its campy extremes. And this enduring antagonism with religion reached a fever pitch during the satanic panic of the 80s, where hysteria around satanic rituals filled news reports, as violence found its ways to the disaffected white youths in the suburbs.
Well, Terry, authorities tell us that the most serious or perhaps the most dangerous kind of devil worship comes in the form of underground cults. Most of them are very secretive, usually organizing clandestine rituals in the dark of night. Well, those ceremonies sometimes involve the sharing of animal blood to gain power, they say, but cult members believe their strength really comes from secrecy.
It's our secrecy that keeps us powerful.
And power, according to this man, is what true Satanists are guaranteed. Police and Sheriff's Department investigators say satanic cults often find that power in animal sacrifice. Photographs support their theory, and some self-proclaimed devil worshippers tout it.
Leading to censorship of music via the PMRC hearings, the parental advisory stickers on CDs and tapes, you know, those things that we used to listen to music on, and opportunities for social outrage and gimmicks for the next era of edgelords.
3 musicians, Frank Zappa, John Denver, and Dee Snider of Twisted Sister, defended their music, citing the importance of free speech. That 5-hour-long hearing wasn't an isolated incident. It was just one moment in the war on rock music that had been infiltrating American culture and politics for years. It was that war that gave us this sticker, one we pretty much take for granted today.
I know I'm skipping a lot here, but for the sake of brevity, the 90s gave us gender-bendy horror aestheticized rocker Marilyn Manson, crusty beard aficionado Rob Zombie, and the eternally inflammatory Eminem. I know this is a long tangent, but in order to understand the social and musical environment, we're gonna have to start looking into these people. And I think this context is important. While only Manson would turn out to be the serial abuser that every mom warned us about, all 3 of these dudes are responsible for constructing the inflammatory romanticization with violent imagery that partners with their edgelord personas. And we have all 3 flavors here. The suburban antagonist who flirts with performative Satanism to scare your local HOA member. It doesn't help that he's also disregarding gender norms and a society kind of okay with queer people. You have the dusty-ass, seemingly murderous cowboy who melds southern rock affects with slasher horror aesthetics in a way that sparks the interest of little edgy boys everywhere. Then you have the consistent asshole, the aggressively self-aware and talented mirror to poor white America that is Slim Shady or early Eminem. Both capitalizing and expanding on the endless angst of the 90s, these figures not only normalized a level of strange passive violence within their imagery, but also continued to expand creatively. Rob Zombie would go on to be one of the most mid-horror directors of the 2000s, and M would dominate the charts even after his peak edgelord era, adding a level of weird grit to the highly manicured but trashy 2000s. What this communicated, at least to me kinda, looking back, is that if you wanna garner attention, especially if you're pissed off and young, edgy, violent, misogyny, jokes about harming women, and generally off-putting antagonism to everything became the social norm for those who didn't care about society's rules or whatever.
I'm not a part of this system.
I would say this attitude bled into my personal middle school, high school experience with the rising popularity of 3 6 Mafia, who, even though they hit a few different hip-hop subgenres, had elements of horrorcore in a few of their releases.
Bitches like who was it, bitch? It was 666, devil thoughts, evil thoughts, trizzy bitches, I just clipped.
And rappers like Tech Nine would carry the horrorcore mantle and generally rise in popularity in 2000s as well. And this, I believed, is enough cultural context to finally discuss Bastard by Tyler, the Creator. Not an excuse for how absurdly bleak it is as a project overall, but to engage with where we were culturally before it, where we have the shock of a twisted, demented individual who's dark and disturbed. The narrative of this album must be framed through a visit to the therapist, because Tyler is just so edgy and demented. In reality, it's an album written by a 17-year-old who's using shock and awe horror imagery, violence against women, and edgelord lyricism to very poorly hide the wounds left by his father leaving at a young age. There's a lot of raw talent here, don't get me wrong, but it's filtered through a level of shock because the vulnerability needed to address these wounds aren't accessible, at least not yet. Tyler, during this era specifically, must wear a mask, caking so many of his hyperactive performances, the jokes, the rudeness, and a very specific brand of plausible deniability. And based on what we know now, this makes a level of sense. Him being closeted, filled with a lot of anger, and creatively frustrated with where hip-hop culture was at the time. Things were weird because this era kind of reached its apex as I was finishing high school. Outkast wasn't really releasing music anymore, and in general, a lot of the swag rap era lacked a level of substance or lyricism, if we're being honest. Niggas weren't really rapping, mostly relying on punchline bars that by today's standards would be mad corny.
Don't even wonder, 'cause she knows she bad, and I got a grocery bag.
Or doing their best radio impersonation of Lil Wayne. While I have favorites of this era, shout out to Bass God.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
The Young Money takeover of the late 2000s and early 2010s left a creative gap in the hip-hop market that Tyler attempted to fill. I wasn't initially sold on it due to how it seemed like homie lacked maturity, but I can see why it popped off. In between the outlandish bars and violent lyrics were, to an extent, a decent flow and doom-coded hip-hop appreciation. But the success of Bastard, coupled with Tyler and company using the internet the way it was intended to be used, garnered Tyler a very devoted skater boy fan base. A cultural intersection that I'll probably do a video on someday. Regardless, his outlandish antics seemed to attract a lot of teenage boys who liked how he just didn't give a fuck. And with Goblin, the landmark video for Yonkers, Tyler now found himself in the mainstream hip-hop conversation. Goblin is not a good album. Although the features are stronger and Tyler's flow has improved, it also ramps up on the violence and misogyny and edgelord behavior. But regardless of my opinion, this record exploded in popularity, and Tyler, a kid with what seems to be a ton of media access, despite his outrageous actions, did what any badass teenager would do if they had a little power. He acted up.
Where the f is my money?
What are you talking about? No!
And he was very good at it, antagonizing celebs, tweeting hella bullshit, everything. I don't think people truly understand how gross and crusty the Wild West of the 2010s Twitter era was. I was just grateful that I spent more time outside. But to the point, the next few years, Tyler and his crew got a TV show, directed some offensive commercials, and basically did a bunch of goofy shit to piss people off. Now, this media backlash didn't stop him, and although bro was far from perfect, 2013 to 2015, he began to soften up.
The genre as a whole, so serious. When they tell me that they fuck with me, like, just based off the music that I make or my opinion on stuff, when they tell me that they fuck with me, I really appreciate it. Same thing as when punk kids come up to me and say, yo, I love the shit you make, or when jazz heads come up to me and say, yo, you fuck with me. Like, they appreciate the aspect, because I take influence from everything.
And this is where I kind of entered. I remember seeing the video for Oldie and OF Tape Volume 2, as well as Doris by Earl Sweatshirt, being on my default albums list as I'd play through Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions and Borderlands 2, making me primed to listen to. Although I'm not the biggest fan of this record, it marks a huge shift in how he approaches songwriting, with it using storytelling motifs and characters to have a more cohesive lens with which to direct their anger and ire. Even though it retains a level of homophobia and misogyny, it's pretty listenable in contrast to Tyler's earlier work. Songs like Cowboy, Awkward, Answer, 48, Domo 23, Iffy, Rusty, and Trashwang exhibit a level of clarity, raucous fun, and introspection that we haven't seen from him yet. Add to that, the structure of the record provides more context from where these intense or angry feelings are coming from. We have Tyler discussing the pain around his father leaving, or alienation felt from being bullied, awkward romantic struggles, in a way that really shows his productive and emotional songwriting range, in a way that really shows off his productive range and emotional maturity, as well as the start of his collaborative and mentor-like relationship with Pharrell Williams. This era also gave us this freestyle.
Y'all niggas got problems? Do y'all do it? So much f***ing money in my pockets, I f***ing walk stupid. Hold up, watch out. I'm a fraud, I pray to God when it's 6 triple.
Cherry Bomb, outside of it being a closeted man throwing out F-slurs like Donald J. Trump's throwing out presidential pardons, is probably one of the most ambitious projects I've heard from him yet. Attempts to balance abrasive rock and noise motifs that contrast the wide and deep sprawling soul and jazz chords in light arrangements that call back to 70s soul music. These callbacks are interesting because despite current discourse that's very detached from Tyler's art, I say that Wolf and Cherry Bomb are very steeped in black music references from a compositional standpoint. The fact that both Roy Ayers and Charlie Wilson make appearances on these albums clues you into why Tyler just didn't really fit in with hip-hop at this time specifically. Coming out of the swag era, the last thing niggas wanted to hear were Roy Ayers-inspired beats or songs that didn't have sparse but loud synth structures. Contemplative soul tracks with hella strings and chord changes weren't really the vibe. Well, until...
All's my life I has to fight, nigga. All's my life
Cherry Bomb coming out a month, I think, after T-Pab, coupled with the fact that it was such a weird record with a mix that was a little hard to listen to, alienated and split the Tyler fan base more than anything, with some folks really fucking with it, but a lot of folks hating it. I can say Smuckers is still one of my favorite Tyler songs though. Find Your Wings is gorgeous, but yes, the mix here is pretty tough to listen to.
Oh shit, if I was fucking president, you don't put down ideas day. We start in history, we start learning about African history and Asian history. We won't learn shit about European history or any American history except for American history between 1960 and 1975, which includes the civil rights movement and everything Marvin Gaye has done up until 1976. Yes, if I ran for president, and skateboarding will be a PE requirement.
From there, we all know the story. Flower Boy sees him bloom into writing lush beds of strings, while we hear Tyler publicly embraced his queer identity, as he loosely reflects on where he is in his late 20s. Igor embraces the lush and vibrant feels of unrequited queer love. Call Me If You Get Lost uses the boisterous and extravagant hip-hop jet-setter lifestyle as a mask for being on the losing end of a love triangle. Chromacopia examines the facets of Tyler's life, his sexuality, how he struggles, how he structures the relationships in his life, his need for privacy, how he feels about his hair, how we all lie to ourselves, and even how he feels about his father. Truly a full-circle project, steeped in inspiration across the African diaspora. And Don't Tap That Glass is a great dance record. Tyler, through getting older and finding a way to be more honest with his work, allowed him to blossom into a critical and commercial darling. What was once this weird, tormented outsider was now by far one of the most adventurous rappers of the past decade. What I did realize, or at the very least understand through my research for this video and revisiting his work, is that though there's a lot of ire coming his way now for hating black folks and his work or actions reflecting that, what's interesting in the maturation of his work is how the hip-hop community and other black creatives called him in, something we'll get more into later. Be it his early collabs with Pusha T, linking with Schoolboy Q, becoming besties with A$AP Rocky, constantly working with Pharrell and Solange, it's not hard to understand that having a diverse group of creatives outside of your personal circle helped him grow creatively, which as a person who plays music, I can relate to. Anyway, to the point of this video, we don't see a public acknowledgement of these different eras of Tyler's career until the single, Sorry Not Sorry. I'm sorry! In an era that lacks great character arcs, Sorry Not Sorry is an interesting character study. Released in 2023 for the extended version of Call Me If You Get Lost, we see Tyler in an uncomfortable confessional performing for what seems to be his parents, past lovers, his ancestors, and possibly others as he comes to terms with his past. Kinda. A song lamenting Tyler hiding his sexual identity, lacking empathy, being distant from his family, past creative ties falling off, but mainly it's a reclamation of his personal space and boundaries, in which all of these eras or different personas, different masks worn throughout the years, were the stepping stones that he needed for him to love himself and are important to who he is now. And the visual ends with him murdering the most recent of those personas while highlighting something I didn't really notice until looking through a lot of his older work. Oddly enough, I've never seen him without a hat or mask on, obviously informing this transition into Chromacopia, which has Tyler embrace his hair in a way that highlights his African heritage, but also informs us that this has been a sore spot for him for a while now. Like, why hide it if not? Well, I would personally say that Tyler's past actions and art are interesting, be it problematic and even at times harmful, is because as an autonomous being, a creative who's kind of had to make it based on what he's made with little help from other people, Tyler has had to configure and construct his black identity all within the public eye, outside of academia, and although younger folks who had TikTok and various forms of communication and info sharing mechanisms for many of their formative years, I can personally say that things were very, very different 10 to 15 years ago. What I ruminate on, especially in regards to building a confident and loving identity in regards to my own personal understanding of my black identity and queer identity, is how treacherous that journey truly is. As a person who grew up in the 2000s, concepts like internalized anti-blackness weren't as openly understood as they are now.
Time is running out. And a lot of black people say that, but for real. Part of why the civil rights movement has been so successful, and part of why those who have come after in terms of our leadership have been able to maintain a presence, is that black people have always had a certain amount of moral currency that we have been using. And let me be the first to tell you, that's used up. White America has been watching us act like fools for a long enough time where any sympathy they may have had to our plight is completely gone. You're approaching a country that, forget hating black people and not hating black people, they just don't care. You can be talking about affirmative action, they can be like, I don't care. It literally is of no importance to me. I don't care about slavery, I don't care about segregation, I don't care about you, I don't care how many of you all go to jail, I don't care at all, because I'm broke. You can't be the proud, noble fighter when every single time someone sees a person that looks like you on television, they're acting like a damn fool. How would they know? How would they know you're not a damn fool?
This isn't to say that Aaron McGruder secretly hated black people and wanted to make fun of them via the poignant black hit, The Boondocks. Not at all. That'd be really weird. I'm saying that popular black consciousness takes different forms, grows and evolves the more people are able to speak to each other. The more discourse amongst black folks is democratized, the more informed our conversations can be. Recently exemplified through a sort of mainstream popularity of authors like Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, and many others. Not that they weren't popping off 10 or 20 years ago. Those ties were with informed parents within academia, those deep in movement work, or fucking nerds. Shout out to my black nerds. Y'all are underappreciated. Not that it was niche, but not as, let's say, accessible as they are now. 90s pop woke politics centered around 5% or nonsense, which I don't have the time to get into, and the 2000s teetered between heightened respectability politics that were in stark contrast with the new money that Southern rappers had in that era specifically. Punctuated by the grim incompetence of the Bush administration and then bolstered by the success of the Obama campaigns, niggas were mad institution peeled. Add to that, there was already normalized internalized anti-blackness of this era that was on par with how awful the decade actually was. I can only speak for myself and what I've experienced as a dark-skinned black person who went to an all-black elementary school, middle school, and high school in East Cleveland, Ohio. I can honestly say that making fun of someone's black features, their nose, their eyes, their lips, their hair, whatever, were par for the course at the time. And like any society, concepts and consciousness align with cultural shifts. The BLM movement, namely the murders of black men, women, and children at the hands of police, something that is, sadly, as American as apple pie, was under the social microscope due to our new forms of communication. Namely, with social media, communication movements were able to expand, bringing things like critical race theory, black anarchistic theory, and other notable authors to the cultural forefront. And this thankfully had many of us re-examine how we speak about each other. So yeah, I enjoyed the Boondocks, but can understand that it doesn't really have a systemic critique of capitalism and its ties to anti-blackness, which also limits its critical scope to be more in line with American individualism. I'm just saying that as a leftist Marxist who enjoys a little anarchist theory now and then, there was a time where I didn't know a lot of this shit, and I try to examine the actions of art and artists through that lens specifically. My personal lens and the lens I see Tyler through are informed with that perspective as well, as we are very close in age, and more than likely experienced a decent amount of social anti-black treatment from people who probably looked like us, and might have been excised from community a little bit, especially if we were into weird art shit or, God forbid, queer. Also, a lot of intra-community signifiers or social norms are loosely based off of very rigid gendered standards. This kind of continues today with black hair discourse to some extent, long-winded conversations about hairlines and beards or facial hair, and actually a very narrow, policed nature in which black men can express themselves. Our heavy social media bubbles, punctuated with clear cultural understandings regarding what is and isn't okay, now influences how we view the past, which I feel like is what started this Tyler the Creator discourse in the first place. In general, most online discourse is very reactionary, with Tyler being the easy punching bag. Because of how our social progress has been flattened, he's no longer a working artist who grew up in a very public and messy way, but now he's the same hurt young adult who tweeted those awful things a decade ago. And since his critics aren't really going to engage with his work anyway, it's easier just to blame him for his past actions as a premeditated denunciation of his blackness for capital. Because social media discourse, by and large, thrives off of explicit moral decisions devoid of context or nuance. The rage, anger, and frustration one may exhibit are not the products of their own personal trauma or them processing things without community or guidance. It's them making deliberate, informed choices to do the wrong thing. It's not art criticism, it's consumer criticism. And I think that's what makes my disconnect with this whole conversation come to the forefront.
Black Hippie, another LA group. Do you know each other? No, never heard of them. Does the hype change your view on life? Yes. It kind of sucks because people are expecting shit, but they don't know anything because it's just hype. They don't really know history or anything. They just know one song and then go based on that. That shit sucks.
As we mentioned earlier, Tyler was eventually called into the hip-hop and Black creative community through continued hard work and collaboration. It doesn't erase the awful things that he did or said, but did play a role in him finding himself while expanding what he could do creatively. What these calls for accountability generally want are for him to take responsibility for his public, edgy childhood, because it complicates how they themselves can morally consume the work that he's making now. Knowing this person who makes good stuff at one time wasn't a good or tolerable person to be around, didn't have the correct takes, had some inflammatory or reactionary opinions, showed glaring imperfections that mirror our own complex relationship with how we see ourselves. It can be hard to conceptualize us as the annoying, prickly young person who made mistakes because maybe we're in a state where we don't like who we currently are. As everyone online postures as the most manicured and perfect version of themselves, and we live in certain online discourse circles that are constantly surveilling and policing the behavior of others, it turns everything, our blackness, our queerness, our artistry, into a performance that must be endlessly critiqued or picked apart. I honestly think this is one of the reasons why so many young people are afraid to make things and put themselves out there. Afraid of disliking their early work one day, it's easier to make fun of those who actually try, who are cringe, but free. This obsession with the past signals to me how we are learning to consume art more than anything. Gone are the long and arduous journeys full of missteps, but a pedestal to climb only if you maintain an extreme amount of restraint, accompanied with an endless amount of knowledge as you attempt to express yourself in a way that alienates nobody.
I'm not finished.
Conversations that are exhausting in their negativity and are both personal but not emotionally or intellectually honest seem to be the norm because these algorithms have basically figured out how to maximize engagement, rewiring our brain in the process. I see young Tyler as a frustrated kid who was traumatized and lashed out through his personal journey, unpacking and constructing his identity. Others talk about his initial or intended audience as if that hasn't really grown or expanded throughout the years. Or like how white people aren't the main consumers of hip-hop in America in the first place. And that clued me into how unserious this conversation actually is. Like, this conversation is more or less in part of the ongoing discourse machine. That's mostly what content is now. Endless discussions regarding the lives, actions, and intentions of famous people. And I'm sure that these critiques of Tyler, or most of these people who were trashed 9 to 15 years ago, aren't based in sincere appreciation or gatekeeping of Black art. As a Black artist who creates music and makes art with a bunch of niggas, I can say that the support really isn't there a lot of the time. There's not a real or vibrant support or ecosystem for musicians or artists pursuing their craft in the first place. These social media avenues spend more time and energy picking apart things that people did a decade ago, rather than look to uplift the myriad of working creatives who are striving to break through these racist algorithms right now. And I get it, if someone does something that makes you uncomfortable in the past, you don't have to listen to their stuff. Like, at all. We all have boundaries, but I don't know. The lack of agency we give ourselves in conversations around hip-hop and music culture as a whole are wildly embarrassing. The dozens of videos saying that hip-hop is dead because they don't want to listen to the new Sexy Red song proves my point. There's so much music you can listen to and discuss and support, but these are not the conversations that I see happening. I hear people every week saying white people need to make rock music again, like there aren't hundreds of indie bands I see on independent or college radio stations every day. My point is, we've allowed the prison of high visibility to dictate how we view the wealth of art that we have available. Maybe changing how we consume music and art can push us to have healthier conversations around what we're listening to, or how the artists that are coming up now can grow and change, and possibly nurture up-and-coming Black talent so that maybe their journey to better love themselves is a bit easier. But hey, I'm ranting, I'm talking shit, I could be wrong about this. But I would say that on a larger level, we tend to reduce artists to however we've seen them at their most visible. And fewer people exemplify this point more than the haunting legacy of D'Angelo.
The whole concept to me and what funk really means to me is It's black rock and roll. It's when George said we have returned to reclaim the pyramids. That's what that represents to me. You know, like, you know, I don't know. It's like we're showing you, and we're coming to reclaim what's ours, and this is ours. Rhythm and blues, what you call rock and roll. This is our music. You know, it's not just about, you know, no disrespect, but, you know, white boys playing guitars. It's not what, you know, we kind of invented this. So, and it's just like a reclaiming of that, you know.
First off, big up to Toure for being the most important black music journalist who has been able to catalog this information so that I'm able to contextualize it for this video. I'll leave a link to their articles that inspired this writing in the description. But with that, the loss of D'Angelo hit deep. Not to be inflammatory, but it's the closest thing that my generation probably has to losing Prince. The amount of love and devotion D'Angelo put into constructing black music is eternally understated. But to the point, he focused his energy on expanding the sound of soul music, collaborated with those who aligned in that vision, and created 3 records that are very dear to me. And in that process, inspired a generation of musicians with a deep pocket to draw from. But if I'm being honest, this deep musically curious legacy wouldn't define how he was viewed or perceived. You see, his first record, Brown Sugar, was extremely successful and accessible. It changed his life in a fiscally comfortable way, but also in a way that made it hard for him to exist while not being in service to folks who enjoyed his music. Homie couldn't go to the bodega or the gas station without getting mobbed by his admirers. But as many would notice, between Brown Sugar, released in '95, and Voodoo, released at the beginning of 2000s, there was a 5-year gap between projects. Well, recorded at Electric Ladyland Studios and operating as a hub for the Soul Aquarians, a collective of groundbreaking experimental black artists that included Questlove, Jay Dilla, Erykah Badu, and many others that you should definitely look into. D'Angelo and the collective working on Voodoo would literally spend late evenings every day studying the greats, watching videos and listening to the entire catalogs of James Brown, George Clinton, Aretha Franklin, Nina Simone, Al Green, Jimi Hendrix, Fela Kuti, you get it. In order to think of different roots-based soul grooves and craft new sounds using their musical ancestry as the guide. And his strategy was extremely successful in that. From the sea-level deep pockets of Send It On to the incredibly concise chords and changes of Spanish Joint, this project would go on to not only define the future of soul music for decades, along with a sister project Mama's Gun by Miss Badu, but it's also like the default jazz reference for academic jazz heads looking to mirror the Questlove-inspired Dilla pocket, if they know how to play and write, if we're being honest. But with all that said, that's not the enduring populist legacy of the project. D'Angelo's manager Dom knew that this special project needed a provocative video to cut through the noise and help it chart better than Drake after a string of gambling losses. So he had the idea of D'Angelo, after continually having 1 a.m. dinners that consisted of pancakes and breakfast foods, work out with a trainer to get his body as chiseled as possible for a music video in which D'Angelo would wear nothing. A slow pan and zoom out, a black room, a simple melody, and one of the most beautiful black men I've ever seen, seemingly butt-ass naked. For a song that's disarming, intimate, and direct and piercing. An amazingly brilliant concept, and one of the most iconic videos of all time. But sadly undermined the creative ambitions of the project. Not intentionally. Let me explain real quick. The raw sexual nature of this video, coupled with the deep soul pocket of the song, went super viral, but in turn superseded the emotional depth of the overall album, where D'Angelo was the chiseled soul singer to be ogled and adored, but not listened to. Screaming girlies at the shows, numerous calls for him to take off his shirt, filled the well-attended performances at the time. Now, D'Angelo, a lot like me, struggled with his body image, and due to the nature of touring, it leaves little room for working out and eating healthy consistently. Also, D'Angelo was mainly focused on making deeply emotive soul music and wanted to exhibit his instrumental and singing prowess. But instead, folks were more interested in seeing his body as a piece of meat. And this undoubtedly morphed his relationship with performing, as well as the art that he put so much love and effort into. So by the time we get into the 2014 release of Black Messiah, it took him reinventing himself and learning a completely new instrument for him to fully embody an onstage persona that made him feel comfortable. Or that's at least me and Toure's poetic interpretation of the story based on what we've read. But what is my point here? Though it's not a one-to-one situation, a lot like Tyler, an image of D'Angelo crystallized into his public persona due to his earlier actions. And despite what he attempted to communicate, he still had a very hard time escaping the perception left by a very specific time in his creative career, a time that didn't tell his full story. Regardless of this myopic and short-sighted view of his work, there were folks who loved his songs deeply, that looked at the liner notes of his records, studied the chord changes, melted with the deep pockets and vocal runs on every album. And like it or not, one of those kids was Tyler, the Creator.
R&B
Yeah,
videos?
oh, bro, I'll sit there.
so
They'll be like,
good.
pick your favorite out of the 7, bro. I will write paragraphs. 'Cause, like, I didn't really have people to talk to music about like that when I was younger. Overall, so like, it's that like 13-year-old in me that just wants to tell people like, no, Vivian Green's first album was actually very, very good. And like, so I'm happy someone noticed that. Back to that, but like, you know, cool, KG did Naughty by Nature.
But he did
that
John
man did not. That man, when he went and did John A. and then did the next album and then did the Coffee Brown and then did the Jaheim, like that's
yo, he did all that shit.
But that's like that's my I love that
Well,
R&B soul
even on
stuff.
What's Your Name, the fact that you chose to sample this
But bro,
H-Town
so that was the thing. That was just like I was listening to that song. I was just like, man, this chord progression is crazy.
And sure, the initial output was messy, but from my recent journey through these songs, I can definitely say that I feel the influence. And it got me thinking of when I started playing music, when I wasn't as well-read as I am now. Going to open mics, talking to friends, enjoying being embraced by a community that would give me records to explore, then go home after work and study, play along to these records for months, and re-enter these spaces week by week, expanding on what I can do and how I can contribute. I'm grateful that I had those spaces. To grow, to be messy, in private. Because there was a time where I didn't love myself. And I would hate to have that constantly thrown in my face as something I needed to constantly address or pay penance to. So for the most part, those are my thoughts on the situation. In regards to Tyler, I don't like that he's a capitalist. So there's that. Also, he dated someone who's pretty young recently. I find that weird and bad. And that's just what I think. What are your thoughts? If you made it this far, drop a wolf emoji or a cherry emoji or whatever your favorite Tyler era was. Many thanks for watching. If you want stuff like this earlier, maybe check out my Patreon. I got exclusive performance stuff there, early uncut access to the vids like this, and you get your names in the credits like the folks scrolling by now. This one was interesting because I had to cover a lot of ground, but also I'm hoping that folks don't take it too seriously. Although it's thought out, it's more of a cultural period piece than anything else. You don't have to like Tyler, the Creator if you don't want to. Hoping to at least have one more video out this year, maybe two. I guess that's all I have to say. Peace.